Usama bin Laden was born in 1957 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, into one of the wealthiest and most influential families in the kingdom. His father, Mohammed bin Laden, was a billionaire construction magnate who had built close ties with the Saudi royal family, making the bin Laden name one of respect and power. Usama, however, was unlike many of his siblings who embraced modern luxuries and Western-style living. From an early age, he showed a serious nature, preferring religious study and solitude over extravagance. He attended prestigious schools, where he was exposed to both modern education and deep Islamic teachings. He absorbed the strict interpretations of Islam taught by his religious mentors, which deeply shaped his worldview. Stories of early Islamic warriors and the glory of Muslim empires fascinated him. These tales ignited a desire within him to follow a path of sacrifice and struggle rather than comfort and privilege. As he grew, the gap between his wealthy lifestyle and his inner convictions widened. Though he had access to unimaginable resources, expensive cars, and luxurious homes, bin Laden rejected much of it, living more simply and devoting himself to prayer, study, and reflection. He developed a strong sense of identity as a Muslim in a world he believed was losing its values. Political tensions in the Middle East during the 1960s and 1970s also influenced his thinking. The Arab-Israeli conflict, the struggles of Palestinians, and the rising presence of Western powers in Muslim lands all left a mark on him. These global events convinced him that Islam was under siege, and it became his mission to play a role in its defense. His student years at King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah were crucial. Here, he came into contact with radical teachers and thinkers who preached the idea of jihad as a religious duty. Bin Laden's personality, combined with these teachings, planted in him a conviction that he was destined to do something larger than himself. At the same time, his family's wealth gave him unique resources. While most young men only dreamed of contributing to a cause, bin Laden had the money, connections, and influence to actually make it possible. By the late 1970s, the seeds of his future were already planted. Though still not widely known, he had developed the mindset of someone who believed he had a divine mission. The comfort of palaces and privilege did not appeal to him the way the call of faith and sacrifice did. The rise of global conflicts only strengthened his resolve. Soon, an event would arrive that would catapult him from a wealthy student into the heart of an international struggle, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. That war would give him the battlefield, the connections, and the recognition he had been waiting for, and it would mark the beginning of his rise from obscurity to worldwide infamy. In 1979, the world changed for Usama bin Laden when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. The invasion shocked the Muslim world and stirred calls for resistance against what many saw as an attack on Islam itself. For bin Laden, this was not just another political conflict, it was the opportunity he had been waiting for. He left behind the comforts of his privileged life in Saudi Arabia and traveled to Pakistan, where the Afghan resistance was organizing. There, he met fighters, clerics, and leaders who shared his belief that jihad was not just a choice but a duty. Unlike most foreign volunteers, bin Laden had the wealth and influence to play a much bigger role than just a foot soldier. He began using his personal fortune to build a support network for the Mujahideen. He provided funds, weapons, medical supplies, and even construction equipment to dig tunnels and shelters in the mountains. These resources earned him respect among the Afghan fighters, who saw him as more than just a wealthy outsider. Bin Laden himself did not stay on the sidelines. He joined the battles, fought in dangerous conditions, and lived with the same hardships as his fellow fighters. His willingness to endure hunger, cold, and danger alongside Afghan warriors earned him credibility. He was not seen as a spoiled rich man but as a brother in arms who truly believed in the cause. He recruited volunteers from across the Muslim world, setting up guest houses and camps for training. Many of these recruits would later form the backbone of his future organization. During these years, he also built lasting relationships with commanders and fighters who respected his commitment and organizational skills. The Afghan War became a defining chapter in bin Laden's life. It gave him the chance to turn his religious convictions into action. He became more than a donor or an activist, he became a leader. As the war dragged on, he began to see himself as a defender of Islam on a global scale. The eventual Soviet withdrawal in 1989 was celebrated as a historic victory for the Mujahideen, and bin Laden's reputation soared. In the eyes of many, he had stood against one of the world's greatest superpowers and won. For him, it was proof that faith and sacrifice could defeat even the mightiest armies. Yet, while many fighters returned home after the war, bin Laden did not see this as the end. For him, Afghanistan was not just a battlefield but a training ground for something larger. He believed that the same model of jihad could be carried into other struggles across the Muslim world. The war gave him confidence, followers, and a vision for the future. It was in these mountains and battlefields that the foundations of his global network were laid. The Afghan jihad had transformed Usama bin Laden from a wealthy young man with ideals into a hardened fighter and emerging leader. His rise had truly begun, and the seeds of what would later become al-Qaeda were quietly taking root. After the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan, many fighters laid down their arms and returned home, but for Usama bin Laden, the struggle was far from over. He believed that the Afghan jihad was only the beginning, a model for future battles to defend Islam. Returning to Saudi Arabia, he expected to be recognized as a hero, yet he found himself at odds with his own government. The Gulf War in 1990 became a turning point. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, bin Laden offered to organize Mujahideen veterans to defend the Arabian Peninsula. But instead of accepting his proposal, the Saudi monarchy invited US and Western troops to station themselves in the kingdom. To bin Laden, this was an unforgivable betrayal. The presence of non-Muslim soldiers on the land of Mecca and Medina, Islam's holiest sites, was a humiliation and a violation of his beliefs. Disillusioned with the Saudi royal family, he grew increasingly vocal against them. His criticisms, combined with his growing influence, soon made him a threat in the eyes of the authorities. By the early 1990s, bin Laden went into exile, moving first to Sudan, where he established businesses, farms, and training camps. Here, he began shaping his network of fighters and ideologues into a more structured organization. This group came to be known as al-Qaeda, meaning, the base. It was not just a loose collection of fighters anymore, it was an organized movement with the goal of waging global jihad. Throughout the 1990s, al-Qaeda became active beyond Afghanistan. Bin Laden poured money into training thousands of recruits, creating camps where they learned guerrilla tactics, bomb-making, and religious indoctrination. He began targeting not just local governments he saw as corrupt, but also the United States, whom he believed was the root cause of Muslim suffering worldwide. His rhetoric turned from defiance into open declarations of war. In 1996, he issued a fatwa calling for jihad against American forces in the Middle East, accusing the U.S. of exploiting Muslim lands, supporting Israel, and corrupting Muslim societies. His words quickly turned into violent action. In 1998, al-Qaeda carried out twin bombings on U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, killing more than 200 people and injuring thousands. The world was shocked by the scale and coordination of the attacks, and bin Laden's name became notorious. For the first time, the U.S. placed him on its list of most wanted fugitives. Yet, even as Washington launched cruise missile strikes against his camps in Afghanistan and Sudan, bin Laden survived and continued to operate. 2 years later, in October 2000, al-Qaeda struck again, this time attacking the USS Cole, a U.S. Navy destroyer docked in Yemen. 17 American sailors were killed, and dozens more were injured. These attacks marked al-Qaeda as a force to be reckoned with, and bin Laden as its unchallenged leader. His vision had evolved from a wealthy man funding fighters to the mastermind of a global terrorist network. While many saw him as a dangerous extremist, to his followers he had become a symbol of resistance against Western dominance. The world now knew his name, and the stage was set for the most devastating attack yet, one that would change the course of history forever. On the morning of September 11, 2001, the world witnessed a tragedy that would alter history forever. 19 al-Qaeda operatives, trained and directed under the guidance of Usama bin Laden, hijacked 4 passenger planes in the United States. 2 of those planes crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, turning the skyscrapers into infernos before they collapsed in a storm of dust and fire. Another plane slammed into the Pentagon, the nerve center of America's military power. The 4th, United Flight 93, was headed for Washington, D.C., but passengers fought back, forcing the plane to crash in a field in Pennsylvania. Nearly 3,000 innocent people lost their lives that day, and countless more were injured, scarred, or traumatized. The world watched in horror as images of burning towers and desperate people leaping from windows filled the news. For bin Laden, it was the culmination of years of planning, a strike meant to show the world that America, the strongest superpower, was not invincible. To him and his followers, 9/11 was a victory, a blow against what he called the enemy of Islam. In the days that followed, bin Laden's name became known in every corner of the globe. While his followers celebrated, the rest of the world mourned. The attacks were condemned internationally, and the United States vowed swift and decisive action. President George W. Bush declared a global war on terror, promising to hunt down bin Laden and dismantle al-Qaeda wherever they hid. Almost overnight, Afghanistan, where al-Qaeda had found shelter under the Taliban regime, became the target of a massive US-led invasion. American forces, along with allies, toppled the Taliban and dismantled al-Qaeda's visible strongholds. Yet bin Laden himself was nowhere to be found. Despite heavy bombings and special operations in the mountains of Tora Bora, he slipped away, vanishing into the rugged terrain along the Afghan-Pakistani border. His ability to escape capture only added to his legend among supporters, while infuriating those determined to bring him to justice. In the years that followed, bin Laden became both a ghost and a symbol. His physical presence was hidden, but his shadow loomed large. He appeared in grainy video recordings, issuing threats and encouraging new attacks. His words inspired militants across the world, from the Middle East to Africa and Asia, creating a network of violence that seemed impossible to contain. The 9/11 attacks also changed daily life in the United States and beyond. Airport security became stricter, intelligence agencies expanded their reach, and wars in Afghanistan and later Iraq reshaped the geopolitical map. Millions of lives were affected because of one day orchestrated by al-Qaeda's leader. But with every passing year, the net around bin Laden grew tighter. He was no longer the powerful man commanding armies in open battlefields. He had become a fugitive, moving from safe house to safe house, relying on secrecy and loyal followers to survive. While he believed 9/11 had dealt a mighty blow to America, it had also sealed his fate. The most wanted man in the world was now hunted relentlessly, and though he had evaded capture, the clock on his freedom had already begun to run out. For nearly a decade after 9/11, Usama bin Laden lived as the world's most wanted fugitive. His life became a shadowy existence, moving between remote hideouts in Afghanistan and Pakistan. No longer able to command openly as he once had during the Afghan jihad, he relied on couriers and loyal operatives to maintain contact with al-Qaeda. The United States had placed a $25 million bounty on his head, and intelligence agencies from across the globe were committed to tracking him down. Despite this, bin Laden managed to evade capture, using his network of supporters and the rugged terrain of the region to stay hidden. To many, his ability to remain free seemed almost mythical, but in reality, his world had grown increasingly smaller. By the mid-2000s, bin Laden's influence was waning. Al-Qaeda had splintered into smaller groups, and while attacks inspired by him still occurred, the centralized power he once commanded was weakening. He appeared in occasional video messages, often looking older and more fragile, yet still attempting to rally his followers. Behind the scenes, however, his life had become confined and cautious. Eventually, he settled in an unusual hiding place, a walled compound in the city of Abbottabad, Pakistan. Just a short distance from a military academy, he lived with several of his wives, children, and trusted guards. The compound, with its towering walls and lack of phones or internet, drew suspicion over time, but for years, it successfully kept his presence a secret. The breakthrough came through careful intelligence work. American operatives tracked one of bin Laden's couriers, who eventually led them to the compound. Months of surveillance followed, confirming the strong possibility that bin Laden was inside. By 2011, the U.S. was ready to act. On the night of May 2, a team of Navy SEALs launched a covert mission known as Operation Neptune Spear. Flying in under the cover of darkness, they landed silently inside the compound. The raid was swift but intense, lasting less than an hour. Bin Laden, found on the upper floor, was shot and killed. The news spread across the world within hours. The man responsible for the deadliest terrorist attack in modern history was finally dead. His body was swiftly taken away by the American forces and later buried at sea, a decision made to prevent his grave from becoming a shrine for extremists. While some celebrated his death as justice delivered, others mourned or even denied it, ensuring that myths about him would continue. His fall marked the end of an era, yet the consequences of his life and actions continued to ripple across the globe. Usama bin Laden's story ended not on the battlefield, but in a quiet compound where he had been hiding from the world. From the privileged son of a wealthy family to the leader of a global terrorist network, his journey had left behind a trail of violence, destruction, and war. The rise and fall of bin Laden not only reshaped global security but also left a lasting imprint on history, reminding the world of how one man's vision, born from ideology and conviction, could change the course of nations, and how, in the end, even the most elusive figure could not escape his fate.